The autumn of 1891 brought with it a peculiar melancholy to the streets of London. A persistent fog had settled over the city like a grey shroud, and the gas lamps struggled to pierce the gloom even at midday. It was on such a dreary afternoon that I found myself once again in the familiar sitting room at 221B Baker Street, watching my friend Sherlock Holmes as he sat cross-legged upon the floor, surrounded by what appeared to be fragments of burned paper. He had been silent for the better part of 2 hours, his long fingers arranging and rearranging the charred pieces with the delicacy of a watchmaker adjusting the springs of a timepiece. I knew better than to interrupt him during these periods of intense concentration, yet I confess my curiosity was considerably piqued. "Watson," he said suddenly, without looking up from his work, "so you have been eyeing that Turkish cigarette case on the mantelpiece for the past 20 minutes. I suggest you indulge yourself rather than sitting there in such evident discomfort." I started, for I had not realized my glances had been so transparent. "My dear Holmes, how on earth—" "Tut, tut," he interrupted, waving a dismissive hand. "You have been attempting to moderate your tobacco consumption at the insistence of your charming wife. Yet the stress of your morning surgery, I observe the ink stain on your right cuff, suggesting you filled out several prescriptions in haste, has left you craving the relaxation of a good smoke. However, you promised Mrs. Watson you would limit yourself to your pipe, and so you have been wrestling with your conscience over whether a single cigarette constitutes a breach of that promise. Really, Watson, life is too short for such trivial moral quandaries." Before I could respond to this characteristic display of observation, a sharp knock sounded at our door. Mrs. Hudson appeared a moment later, her face flushed with excitement. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, it's Inspector Lestrade from Scotland Yard. He says it's most urgent and won't take no for an answer." "Then by all means, show him up," Holmes replied, sweeping his charred papers into a drawer with surprising care. "The reconstruction of Lord Blackwood's burned correspondence can wait. If Lestrade has ventured out in this wretched weather, the matter must be of considerable interest." Inspector G. Lestrade entered our rooms with the air of a man who had reached the absolute limit of his professional resources. His normally neat appearance was disheveled, his collar askew, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. He barely waited for the door to close before speaking. "Mr. Holmes, I need your help. Scotland Yard needs your help. The entire Metropolitan Police needs your help." He paused, seeming to gather himself. "We have a murder, but that's not the extraordinary part. We have a witness to the murder, a witness who saw everything, who can identify the killer beyond any shadow of doubt." He looked between us, his expression one of profound bewilderment. "The problem, gentlemen, is that our witness has no face." Holmes, who had been in the process of lighting his pipe, froze with the match halfway to the bowl. "I beg your pardon." "No face, Mr. Holmes. Or rather, a face so badly disfigured that every identifying feature has been obliterated. Being it this person, we don't even know if it's a man or woman, has provided testimony so detailed, so precise, that it could only have come from someone who witnessed the crime firsthand. But we cannot identify this witness, cannot verify their story, and cannot present them in any court of law." He sank into Watson's chair without invitation. "We are holding someone who may be the key to solving a brutal murder, and we haven't the faintest idea who they are." Holmes settled into his own chair, his grey eyes gleaming with that peculiar intensity I had come to associate with a problem that truly engaged his faculties. "You interest me exceedingly, Lestrade. Pray give us the facts in their proper sequence, omitting nothing, however trivial it may seem." Lestrade drew out his notebook with hands that trembled slightly. "The victim is, or was, Sir Edmund Carstairs, the railway magnate, 62 years of age, worth somewhere in the vicinity of £500,000. He was found yesterday morning in his study at his Mayfair residence, shot through the heart at close range. The butler discovered him at 7 o'clock when he came to open the curtains." "The household?" Holmes prompted. "Sir Edmund was a widower. His wife died 5 years ago. The household consists of the butler, Harold Greaves, who has been with the family for 30 years, a housekeeper, Mrs. Martha Dorsey, a cook, 2 housemaids, and a footman, all thoroughly respectable, all with unimpeachable references. Family. 1 son, Mr. Julian Carstairs, aged 35. He's something of a disappointment to his father, by all accounts. A gambler with expensive tastes and a string of debts. And he stands to inherit everything. There's also a nephew, Mr. Philip Ashworth, son of Sir Edmund's late sister. He's been employed in his uncle's railway company for the past 10 years and lives in modest circumstances in Bloomsbury. Excellent. And the circumstances of the death? Lestrade consulted his notes. Sir Edmund was killed between midnight and 2 o'clock in the morning, according to the police surgeon. He was seated at his desk, apparently working on some business correspondence. The safe behind his desk was open, forced open with professional skill, Mr. Holmes, and approximately £2,000 in banknotes were missing. The study window, which overlooks a side garden, was found slightly ajar. Suggesting, Holmes murmured, that we are meant to believe a burglar entered through the window, was surprised by Sir Edmund, hung and shot him during the course of the robbery. Precisely what we thought at first, Lestrade agreed. A straightforward case of burglary turned violent. But then, at 3 o'clock yesterday afternoon, this person appeared at Scotland Yard. He paused, as if gathering courage to continue. The individual was wrapped in layers of bandages, with only the eyes visible through small slits. They wore a long overcoat and hat, and carried a walking stick. The voice, high and thin, possibly disguised, asked to speak to someone about the Carstairs murder. When we brought them into an interview room, they proceeded to describe the entire crime in exhaustive detail. Holmes leaned forward. What manner of detail? They described Sir Edmund sitting at his desk, writing with a gold fountain pen. We found such a pen at the scene. They described the killer entering through the study door, not the window. They described the exact words spoken before the shot was fired. You should have paid what you owed. They even described the killer taking the key to the safe from Sir Edmund's watch chain before forcing it open to make it look like a burglary. Remarkable, Holmes breathed. And the identity of this killer. That's where it becomes truly extraordinary. The witness claimed the killer was Sir Edmund's own son, Julian Carstairs. They described him in perfect detail, his height, his clothing, even the signet ring he wears on his left hand. Everything matches. We brought young Carstairs in for questioning immediately. And? He has no alibi. He admits he was in the house that night. He has rooms on the 3rd floor. And he admits his financial difficulties and that his father had refused him further assistance. But he utterly denies the murder, claims he was asleep in his rooms and heard nothing. Lestrade rubbed his eyes wearily. We have testimony that would hang him, Mr. Holmes, from a witness we cannot identify, cannot verify, and cannot produce in court. The witness refuses to remove the bandages, refuses to give a name or address, just sits in our holding room, waiting. Waiting for what? That's what they said when I asked, I'm waiting for Mr. Sherlock Holmes to understand. Those were their exact words, Mr. Holmes. I am waiting for Mr. Sherlock Holmes to understand. A profound silence fell over our sitting room. Outside, the fog pressed against our windows like a living thing. Holmes remained motionless for several moments, and his fingers steepled beneath his chin, his eyes closed in concentration. Finally, he opened his eyes and looked at Lestrade with an expression of such keen interest that I knew the case had seized him completely. This grows more fascinating by the moment. Tell me, Lestrade, this faceless witness, are they under guard? 2 constables watching the door at all times. The witness has not attempted to leave. And they have eaten? Drunk? Refused all food and drink. It's been nearly 24 hours now. Most suggestive. Watson, fetch your coat and medical bag. Lestrade, we shall accompany you to Scotland Yard immediately. I must see this extraordinary witness for myself. He paused at the door, turning back with a slight smile. Though I suspect, my dear Lestrade, that what we are truly being invited to witness is not a person, but a performance, and a most cunningly contrived one at that. As we descended to the street where Lestrade's police carriage waited, I could not shake the feeling that we were being drawn into something far more complex than a simple murder case. The fog swallowed us as we drove through the darkening streets toward Scotland Yard, and somewhere in that grey murk, I sensed, lay a truth as obscured as the face of our mysterious witness. Holmes remained silent throughout the journey, but I recognized the signs, the intensity of his gaze, the slight tension in his shoulders, the restless drumming of his fingers against his knee. My friend was already several steps ahead of us all, following threads of logic invisible to lesser minds. What awaited us at Scotland Yard I could not imagine. But I knew with absolute certainty that before this case was concluded, Holmes would unravel a mystery that had left the finest minds of the Metropolitan Police in complete bewilderment. The game, as Holmes was fond of saying, was afoot. We arrived at Scotland Yard as the gas lamps were being lit along the embankment, their feeble glow barely penetrating the thickening fog. Lestrade led us through the familiar corridors with an urgency that spoke volumes about the pressure he was under. Officers nodded respectfully as we passed, though I noticed several exchanging troubled glances when they thought we were not looking. "The witness is being held in interview room 3, Lestrade explained as we climbed the worn stone stairs. "We've kept the matter as quiet as possible, but word has spread through the building. Some of the men are calling it unnatural, Mr. Holmes. They say the person never moves except to write additional statements, never speaks unless questioned directly." "And these additional statements?" Holmes inquired sharply. "More details about the crime, the texture of the carpet where the killer stood, the smell of brandy on Sir Edmund's breath, the ticking of the mantelpiece clock which read midnight. It's as though this witness has photographed every element of the scene in their mind." We reached a door flanked by 2 burly constables who straightened at our approach. Through a small window set into the door, I caught my first glimpse of our mysterious witness. The figure sat motionless at a plain wooden table, entirely shrouded in what appeared to be medical bandages. A long, dark overcoat hung from the shoulders, and gloved hands rested flat upon the table surface. Even from this distance, there was something profoundly unsettling about the absolute stillness of the figure. "Before we enter," Holmes said, turning to Lestrade, "I require certain information. These bandages, have you examined them? Clean linen, professionally applied, as if done by a hospital or private physician. The hands? Gloved throughout. The witness has not removed them. And the walking stick you mentioned?" Lestrade gestured to a corner where a black walking stick leaned against the wall. Holmes examined it with interest, running his fingers along its length and studying the silver handle through his lens. "Expensive," he murmured. "Custom-made by Harringtons of Bond Street. Note the wear pattern on the ferrule, used regularly for at least 2 years. The owner is right-handed and approximately 5 feet 8 inches in height. There is also a peculiar indentation here on the handle, suggesting the owner has an injury or deformity affecting the right thumb." He straightened and handed the stick to me. "Now, let us meet this extraordinary individual." The moment we entered the room, I felt an almost palpable sense of wrongness. The bandaged figure did not turn to acknowledge our presence, but remained absolutely still, facing the far wall. Only when Holmes pulled out a chair and sat opposite did the head slowly rotate toward us. Through the narrow slits in the bandages, I glimpsed eyes that were remarkable in their intensity, dark, intelligent, and utterly unreadable. "You wish to see me?" Holmes said calmly, and as though addressing a masked figure at Scotland Yard were the most natural thing in the world. "I am here. Now, shall we dispense with this elaborate charade and discuss what you truly wish to accomplish?" The silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then, that thin, peculiar voice emerged from behind the bandages. "You are disappointed, Mr. Holmes. You expected immediate revelation." "On the contrary, I expected exactly what I have found, a carefully constructed mystery within a mystery. You have gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal your identity while simultaneously providing damning testimony against Julian Carstairs. The question that interests me is not who you are, but why this particular method was necessary. The figure's gloved fingers moved for the first time, pushing a sheet of paper across the table. My latest statement. So I have remembered additional details about that night. Holmes picked up the paper and read it with furrowed brow. His expression darkened as he continued down the page. When he finished, he looked up at Lestrade. This changes everything. This witness now claims to have seen not only Julian Carstairs, but a second person in the study that night, a woman partially concealed in the shadows near the bookcase. What? Lestrade snatched the paper. But this wasn't in the original testimony. Memory is a curious thing, the bandaged figure said. Details return slowly, especially after trauma. Holmes leaned back in his chair, his grey eyes never leaving the witness. You are playing a dangerous game. Each new revelation makes your testimony less credible while simultaneously deepening the mystery. Don't you wish me to question everything? The murder itself, the supposed witness, even the victim? Very well. I shall question all of it. He stood abruptly. Lestrade, I must examine the Carstairs residence immediately. This witness will remain here, of course, under guard. Of course, the figure replied. I have nowhere else to be. I'm waiting, Mr. Holmes, waiting for you to see what I have seen. As we left the room, I glanced back at the motionless figure and felt a chill despite the stuffiness of the corridor. Holmes was silent until we reached the street, and then he turned to me with an expression of grim determination. Watson, we are dealing with either a madman or someone of exceptional cunning, and either possibility makes them exceedingly dangerous. The Carstairs residence in Mayfair presented an imposing facade of grey stone and black iron, its windows dark, save for a single light burning in what I presumed to be the butler's pantry. Lestrade had telegraphed ahead, and we were admitted immediately by the aged butler, Greaves, whose dignified bearing could not entirely conceal the strain of recent events. Mr. Holmes, he said with a slight bow, the household has been greatly disturbed by this tragedy. Sir Edmund was a demanding master, but a fair one. His death has shocked us all profoundly. Holmes waved away the pleasantries with characteristic impatience. The study, if you please, and I shall require absolute silence while I examine it. Inspector Lestrade will question the household staff, but you will attend me personally to answer specific queries. The study was a large room panelled in a dark oak, dominated by a massive mahogany desk positioned to face the door. Behind it stood an iron safe, its door hanging open, revealing empty shelves within. The outline of where Sir Edmund's body had lain was still visible on the Persian carpet, marked by the police. Holmes stood in the doorway for a full minute, his keen eyes sweeping every inch of the room before he entered. Greaves, he said without turning, when you discovered Sir Edmund that morning, was the door to the study open or closed? Closed, sir. As was customary. Sir Edmund always shut the door when working on confidential matters. And the window? Slightly ajar, perhaps 2 inches. Most unusual, as Sir Edmund felt the cold acutely and never opened windows during the autumn months. Holmes crossed to the window and examined it minutely with his lens. The catch shows recent scratching, consistent with being forced from outside. Yet observe, Watson, the dust on the exterior sill is undisturbed. No one climbed through this window. He turned to the butler. Where does this window overlook? The side garden, sir. A narrow space between this house and the neighbour's wall. The garden gate is kept locked. Was it locked that morning? Yes, sir. I checked it myself after the police suggested someone might have entered from the street. Holmes moved to the desk, examining the surface with meticulous care. The gold fountain pen Lestrade had mentioned lay beside an unfinished letter. Holmes picked it up, noting the dried ink on the nib. Sir Edmund was left-handed, he observed. Note how the pen rests on the right side of the blotter. positioned for a left hand to pick up naturally. Yet the letter itself shows right-handed penmanship. "Impossible, sir," Greaves interjected. "Sir Edmund was most decidedly right-handed. I've watched him sign documents countless times." Holmes's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Indeed. Then we have our first concrete discrepancy between appearance and reality." He moved behind the desk to examine the safe. This was forced with considerable skill, yet also with unnecessary violence. "See here, Watson, the lock mechanism has been destroyed completely, yet a skilled cracksman would have opened it with minimal damage. And someone wished us to believe this was the work of a professional while simultaneously betraying their amateur status." He straightened and addressed Greaves once more. "The night of the murder, did you hear the gunshot?" "No, sir. My quarters are on the ground floor at the rear of the house. The study is well insulated, and I confess, somewhat hard of hearing." "And the other servants?" "None reported hearing anything unusual. The household retires early, sir. By 11 o'clock everyone had gone to their rooms." "Except Julian Carstairs." "Mr. Julian keeps irregular hours. His rooms are on the 3rd floor, above Sir Edmund's bedroom suite on the 2nd floor." Holmes began pacing the room, his hands clasped behind his back. "Tell me about the relationship between father and son." Greaves hesitated, now too clearly uncomfortable discussing family matters. "Strained, sir. Mr. Julian has been a source of considerable disappointment. His gambling debts, his unsuitable associates. Sir Edmund had recently refused to settle another large debt. There was a heated argument in this very room 3 days before the murder." "You overheard this argument?" "I could not help but hear raised voices. Sir Edmund's words were quite clear. 'Not another penny, Julian. You'll inherit when I'm dead and not a moment before.'" The significance of this statement hung in the air like smoke. Holmes returned to the desk and examined the unfinished letter once more. His expression suddenly sharpened, and he held the paper up to the lamplight. "Watson, your eyes are younger than mine. What do you make of the watermark?" I studied the sheet carefully. "It appears to be premium writing paper, Holmes. The watermark shows a crowned lion, likely from one of the better stationers." "Precisely. And now observe the other letters in this drawer." He withdrew several sheets, each bearing the same watermark. All identical, all purchased from the same source. Yet this unfinished letter, he held it up again, has no watermark whatsoever. This is common paper, carefully matched in color and weight to Sir Edmund's usual stationery, but lacking that one distinguishing feature. Lestrade appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "Mr. Holmes, I've just finished interviewing the staff. Every one of them confirms that Julian Carstairs returned home at approximately 11:30 that evening, went directly to his rooms, and was not seen again until morning." "Not seen," Holmes murmured. "But that is not quite the same as not being present, is it?" He turned to Faceless, and I recognized the gleam in his eye that indicated he had grasped something essential. "Gentlemen, we are not investigating a murder that occurred as our witness described. We are investigating an elaborate fabrication, and somewhere in this house lies the proof." Holmes insisted on examining Julian Carstairs' rooms on the 3rd floor, despite Lestrade's protest that they had already been thoroughly searched. The younger Carstairs, we learned, had been released on his own recognizance but forbidden to leave London. His chambers consisted of a bedroom, a small sitting room, and a private bathroom, quarters that spoke of faded elegance and recent financial difficulty. "Note the wardrobe, Watson," Holmes said, now flinging open the doors to reveal a collection of expensive suits and evening wear. "Our Mr. Carstairs maintains appearances despite his debts. These garments are from Savile Row, none more than 2 years old. A man who spends his last pounds on fine tailoring while owing thousands to money-lenders is either a fool or someone desperate to maintain a particular social position." He moved to the writing desk, rifling through papers with practiced efficiency. Bills, dunning letters, and IOUs cascaded across the surface. Here we have debts totaling nearly £8,000. The moneylenders are growing impatient. Several of these letters contain thinly veiled threats. Yet curiously, there are no gambling receipts from the past fortnight. For a supposedly compulsive gambler, Mr. Carstairs appears to have shown unusual restraint recently. Perhaps he had no funds left to gamble with, I suggested. Perhaps. Or perhaps his attention was occupied elsewhere. Holmes crossed to the window, which overlooked the rear garden. Lestrade, you mentioned a nephew, Philip Ashworth. What were his movements that night? Lestrade consulted his notebook. He claims to have been home alone at his lodgings in Bloomsbury. No alibi, but also no apparent motive. Sir Edmund paid him a modest salary, and while he's not mentioned in the will beyond a small bequest of £500, he seemed content with his employment. Did he indeed? Holmes's tone was sceptical. A man who has worked faithfully for 10 years receives £500 while the dissolute son inherits £500,000. And I should very much like to meet this paragon of contentment. But first, he dropped to his knees and began examining the floorboards beneath the window with his lens. Aha, Watson, bring the lamp closer. In the concentrated light, I could see faint scratches on the wooden floor as though something heavy had been dragged across it. Holmes traced the marks to a large trunk positioned against the wall. Together, we pulled it away from its position, revealing more distinct scratches leading to the window. This trunk has been moved repeatedly and recently, Holmes declared, yet it currently contains nothing but old clothes and linens. He examined the window frame. And here we see fresh marks where a rope might have been secured. Most illuminating. You think Julian climbed down from his window? Lestrade asked. I think someone wished us to consider that possibility, but observe the architecture, Inspector. This window is directly above Sir Edmund's bedroom suite. A rope descent would require passing those windows, risking discovery. Moreover, the rope would need to be secured inside this room, yet there are no corresponding marks on the trunk itself, only on the floor where it was positioned. He straightened, his expression thoughtful. We are meant to see evidence of guilt, yet each piece contradicts another. The forced window that no one passed through, the left-handed pen for a right-handed man, the forged letter on unmarked paper, and now rope marks without a rope and trunk movements that serve no clear purpose. A knock at the door interrupted his musings. Greaves entered with a silver tray bearing a telegram. For you, Mr. Holmes. The boy said it was most urgent. Holmes tore it open, his eyes scanning rapidly. His expression transformed from interest to something approaching excitement. Excellent. Watson, we must return to Baker Street immediately. Lestrade, I require you to arrange interviews with both Julian Carstairs and Philip Ashworth for tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Bring them separately and ensure they do not communicate with each other beforehand. But what about the witness at Scotland Yard? Lestrade protested. Our faceless friend will keep. In fact, I suspect they are counting on us taking precisely the time we need to unravel this puzzle. They have staged their performance carefully. They will not leave before the final act. Holmes was already moving toward the stairs. Tell me, Lestrade, has anyone attempted to visit this witness? Family? The solicitors? Anyone? Not a soul. It's as though the person has no existence outside that interview room. Precisely as I suspected. Come, Watson. We have research to conduct, and the British Museum Library closes at 8. As our hansom rattled through the fog-shrouded streets toward Baker Street, I ventured a question. Holmes, surely you don't believe we'll find answers in dusty volumes? On the contrary, my dear fellow. The telegram was from my brother Mycroft. He has discovered something most pertinent about Sir Edmund Carstairs' business dealings. Something that casts an entirely different light on our railway magnate. Sir Edmund, it seems, was not merely a builder of railways, but a destroyer of competitors. 3 rival companies have been systematically bankrupted over the past 5 years through methods that, while technically legal, were morally questionable at best. You think one of these ruined competitors might have sought revenge? I think, Watson, that we have been so focused on the theatrical witness and the obvious suspect that we have failed to ask the most fundamental question. Was Sir Edmund Carstairs the intended victim at all? The British Museum Library was nearly deserted when we arrived, its vast reading room illuminated by pools of gaslight that left the distant ceiling lost in shadow. Mycroft Holmes awaited us at a corner table, his considerable bulk arranged comfortably in a reinforced chair, surrounded by ledgers, newspapers, and business journals that formed a paper fortress around him. "Sherlock," he acknowledged with the barest nod, and his keen grey eyes, so like his brother's, assessing me briefly before returning to the documents before him. "Dr. Watson, you are pursuing the Carstairs matter, I presume. I thought you might benefit from certain information not readily available through conventional channels." "Your sources remain admirably comprehensive," Holmes replied, settling into a chair. "What have you discovered about Sir Edmund's business practices?" Mycroft pushed a ledger across the table. "The Northern and Midland Railway Company, bankrupted 18 months ago, the Yorkshire and Lancashire line, dissolved last spring, and most recently, the Ashworth and Sons Railway, which collapsed in July after Sir Edmund undercut their contracts and poached their investors. Each represented years of work and considerable capital investment. Each left families destitute and reputations destroyed." "Ashworth?" I interjected. "But surely not." "Indeed, Doctor. Philip Ashworth's father, Sir Edmund's own brother-in-law, founded that company 30 years ago. When he died 5 years past, Philip inherited a thriving enterprise. Within 4 years of his uncle's calculated attacks, the company was worthless. Philip came begging for employment, and Sir Edmund graciously provided him with a minor clerical position at a fraction of what he might have earned elsewhere." Holmes leaned forward intently. "And Philip's demeanor during this period?" "By all accounts, he accepted his reduced circumstances with remarkable grace. Too much grace, perhaps. And I've learned that he maintained correspondence with several of his father's former business associates, men who lost fortunes when Ashworth and Sons collapsed." Mycroft produced several photographs. "These are the principals, James Whitmore, Thomas Grenville, and a particularly interesting fellow named Marcus Blackwood. All 3 attended Philip's father's funeral. All 3 have been observed meeting with Philip at various public houses over the past 6 months." Holmes studied the photographs with intense concentration. "Blackwood. Where have I encountered that name recently?" "Lord Blackwood's burned correspondence," I reminded him. "The papers you are reconstructing this afternoon." "Precisely. Watson, you surpass yourself. Mycroft, what can you tell me of Marcus Blackwood?" "Son of the late Lord Blackwood, your current client, is estranged from the family after a scandal involving forged documents some years ago. He has since operated on the margins of respectable society. Not quite criminal, but certainly not above bending legal niceties when it suits him. He invested heavily in Ashworth and Sons based on his father's recommendation and lost nearly everything." Holmes rose and began pacing between the towering bookshelves, his mind clearly racing ahead. "So we have Philip Ashworth, systematically ruined by his uncle, maintaining contact with other victims of Sir Edmund's business methods. We have evidence suggesting elaborate staging at the murder scene. And we have a mysterious witness whose testimony serves to direct suspicion toward Julian Carstairs while simultaneously becoming increasingly unreliable through contradictory additions." "You believe Philip Ashworth is behind this?" Lestrade asked. "I believe Philip Ashworth may be involved, but the complexity of this scheme suggests a more sophisticated mind at work. Consider, the murder is staged to appear as a burglary. Julian Carstairs is the obvious suspect given his financial desperation and recent quarrel with his father. Yet instead of allowing the evidence to speak for itself, we are presented with this extraordinary witness who provides testimony that is simultaneously convincing and impossible to verify." Mycroft's expression showed grudging admiration. "You perceive the double bluff, The witness's existence makes us question the case against Julian Carstairs, leading us to investigate more thoroughly and thus discover evidence of a broader conspiracy. Exactly. We are meant to uncover Philip's connection to the other victims. We are meant to see this as revenge by a group of wronged businessmen, but I suspect the truth is more personal and far more Byzantine. Holmes retrieved the photographs and examined them once more. Mycroft, I require detailed backgrounds on Whitmore, Grenville, and particularly Blackwood. Also, any information about medical professionals who might have treated severe facial injuries in recent months. Facial injuries? I asked, bewildered. Our bandaged witness, Watson. Those wrappings are professional, applied by someone with medical training. Yet why would someone with genuine facial disfigurement choose this particular moment to appear with testimony about a murder? The timing is too convenient. I believe the bandages serve not to conceal injuries but to conceal identity while simultaneously creating a theatrical distraction. Mycroft gathered several documents into a folder. I shall have the information sent to Baker Street by morning. However, Sherlock, I must warn you, there are rumors circulating in certain government circles about this case. Sir Edmund's death has created complications in several railway contracts with India Office implications. There is pressure for swift resolution. There is always pressure for swift resolution, Holmes replied dismissively. Justice, however, requires patience and precision. Come, Watson, Lestrade. We have imposed upon Mycroft's evening sufficiently. Tomorrow we interview our suspects, and I believe by tomorrow evening we shall have peeled away enough layers of this elaborate deception to glimpse the truth beneath. As we emerged into the foggy night, I could not shake the feeling that we were still missing some crucial element. Holmes seemed energized rather than troubled, but I knew from experience that even his formidable intellect could be led astray by sufficiently cunning misdirection. Morning brought no relief from the oppressive fog that had settled over London like a curse. Holmes had been awake since dawn, surrounded by the documents Mycroft had dispatched, smoking his pipe with such intensity that our sitting room resembled nothing so much as a particularly noxious opium den. When I emerged from my bedroom, and he thrust a photograph at me without preamble. Marcus Blackwood, Watson. Study his features carefully. What do you observe? I examined the photograph, which showed a thin-faced man of perhaps 40 years with dark eyes and a prominent nose. He appears intelligent, somewhat austere. The set of his jaw suggests determination, possibly stubbornness. Look at his hands. I peered more closely. In the photograph, Blackwood held a walking stick, his right hand gripping the handle in an awkward manner. His thumb appears to be positioned strangely, as though he cannot grip properly. An old injury, according to Mycroft's notes. Blackwood's thumb was crushed in a railway accident 15 years ago and never healed correctly. Now, Watson, recall the walking stick we examined at Scotland Yard, and the indentation on the handle suggesting a deformity of the right thumb. The implication struck me like a physical blow. Good Lord, you believe Marcus Blackwood is our bandaged witness? I believe Marcus Blackwood may be one part of a very elaborate mechanism, but we are still missing the central gear that makes the entire apparatus function. He consulted his watch. Lestrade should arrive with Julian Carstairs momentarily. I want you to observe young Carstairs with particular attention to his hands and his manner of speech. Note any nervous habits, any tells that might indicate deception. A knock announced Lestrade's arrival with our first interview subject. Julian Carstairs proved to be a handsome man in his mid-30s, dressed impeccably despite his recent ordeal, and his manner oscillated between defensive arrogance and barely suppressed anxiety. He took the chair Holmes indicated with the air of someone accustomed to being judged and found wanting. Mr. Carstairs, Holmes began without preamble. You are left-handed, are you not? The question clearly surprised him. I am. Why does that matter? Your father was right-handed. Yet the unfinished letter on his desk the night he died was written by a left hand, or rather, written awkwardly by someone attempting to disguise their natural right-handed script. Julian's face paled. "I don't understand what you're suggesting." "I'm suggesting that someone entered your father's study after his death and created evidence. The forced safe, the opened window, the unfinished letter. Someone who wished to stage a scene that would invite certain conclusions. Tell me, where exactly were you between midnight and 2 o'clock that morning?" "In my rooms, as I've stated repeatedly. I heard nothing. I saw nothing. I was asleep." "You retired at 11:30, according to the servants. Yet your valet noted that your evening clothes smelled strongly of tobacco smoke when he collected them the next morning." "You do not smoke, Mr. Carstairs. Where were you that evening before you returned home?" Julian's composure cracked slightly. "I was at a club in St. James. I admit it freely. I was gambling, Mr. Holmes, despite having promised my father I would cease. I lost another £200 I could ill afford. I returned home in disgrace and went directly to bed. That is the truth." "The name of this club?" "The Marlborough. You may verify it with the proprietor." Holmes made a note. "And your relationship with your cousin, Philip Ashworth?" "Philip?" Julian seemed genuinely puzzled. "We're cordial enough, I suppose. We rarely see each other socially. He worked for my father's company." "Why?" "You were unaware that your father systematically destroyed Philip's inheritance? That the Ashworth Railway Company was deliberately bankrupted through your father's business practices?" Julian stared. I knew nothing of the details of father's business. He considered me too irresponsible to be trusted with such matters. Philip never mentioned. He stopped, his expression thoughtful. But then Philip wouldn't, would he? Pride would prevent him from revealing how thoroughly he'd been humiliated. Lestrade shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Holmes, are you suggesting Philip Ashworth as an alternative suspect?" "I am suggesting that we have been viewing this case through an unnecessarily narrow lens. Mr. Carstairs, one final question. Have you ever met a man named Marcus Blackwood?" "Blackwood? No, I don't believe so. Should I have?" Holmes dismissed him with a wave. "That will be all for now. Do not leave London. Inspector, please bring in Philip Ashworth." After Julian departed, Holmes turned to me with satisfaction. "Did you observe his hands, Watson? No ink stains, no calluses from pen work. Yet the forged letter required someone comfortable with writing. Julian Carstairs is many things, but he is not our forger." Philip Ashworth entered with the demeanor of a man who had long ago accepted his diminished circumstances. He was slight of build, with prematurely grey hair and the stooped shoulders of someone who spent long hours at a desk. His hands, I noted immediately, were ink-stained and bore the telltale calluses of habitual writing. "Mr. Ashworth," Holmes began, "tell me about your father's railway company." Philip Ashworth's face showed no surprise at the question, only a weary resignation. "My father built that company from nothing, Mr. Holmes. It was his life's work, his legacy. When he died, I was determined to honor his memory by maintaining what he had created." His voice remained steady, but his ink-stained fingers tightened on the armrest. "I failed. Within 4 years, everything was gone." "Not through any fault of your own," Holmes observed quietly. "Sir Edmund Carstairs ensured your failure through systematic undermining of your business relationships and contracts. My uncle was a brilliant businessman, ruthless but brilliant. He saw opportunity where others saw family obligation." Philip's smile was bitter. "He offered me employment afterward, you understand. Said it was his duty to help his late sister's son. The salary he offered was barely sufficient for a clerk. Yet I accepted. What choice did I have?" "You might have sought other employment. Surely your experience—" "My experience?" Philip laughed without humor. "Mr. Holmes, When a railway company collapses as spectacularly as mine did, the stench of failure clings to everyone associated with it. Other firms would not risk hiring me. My uncle knew that he engineered not just my financial ruin, but my complete professional humiliation. Holmes leaned forward. Yet you maintained contact with others who suffered similar fates. James Whitmore, Thomas Grenville, Marcus Blackwood. What was the nature of these meetings? Philip hesitated, and I saw calculation behind his eyes. We shared common grievances. Is that surprising? Men who have been wronged often seek the company of those who understand their bitterness. Did these meetings ever discuss revenge? We discussed many things over brandy and cigars. Revenge, justice, the fine line between the two. But discussion is not action, Mr. Holmes. I did not murder my uncle. Where were you the night of his death? At my lodgings in Bloomsbury, as I told Inspector Lestrade. Alone, unfortunately, so I cannot prove it. And I'd been working on quarterly reports for my uncle's company. Ironwork I was required to complete despite the late hour. He produced a ledger from his coat. You may examine it if you wish. The entries are dated, and my landlady can confirm she heard me moving about until well past midnight. Holmes accepted the ledger and studied it briefly before passing it to me. The entries were meticulous, written in the same careful hand throughout. You are left-handed, Mr. Ashworth. I am. My father was as well. He always said it gave us an advantage in seeing the world from a different perspective. Indeed. Tell me about Marcus Blackwood. How well do you know him? For the first time, Philip's composure wavered. Marcus and I became acquainted after my company's collapse. He had also invested heavily based on my father's recommendation, yet he lost considerably more than I did, nearly his entire inheritance. He has been supportive during difficult times. Has he suggested ways to address your shared grievances? Marcus has many ideas, Mr. Holmes. He is a man of considerable imagination and resourcefulness, but I must emphasize that neither he nor I has done anything illegal. Yet someone murdered Sir Edmund Carstairs, someone staged an elaborate scene to suggest burglary, and someone appeared at Scotland Yard, wrapped in bandages, claiming to have witnessed Julian Carstairs commit the crime. Holmes's grey eyes were intent. You are an intelligent man, Mr. Ashworth. Surely you see the pattern. Philip met his gaze steadily. I see that someone has gone to great lengths to create confusion. Perhaps the true murderer wishes to ensure that suspicion falls on multiple parties, making it impossible to determine the actual culprit. Or perhaps, Holmes countered, the entire performance is designed to distract from a simpler truth. Tell me, what would you have done if you had inherited your father's company intact? What were your plans for its future? The question seemed to surprise Philip. I would have expanded into European markets. My father had begun preliminary negotiations with French and German partners before his death. It was a sound strategy, one that might have made us the dominant railway company in Europe within a decade. And did Sir Edmund pursue these European contracts after bankrupting your company? He did, with considerable success. The connections my father established, and the groundwork he laid. My uncle simply appropriated it all and claimed the credit. The bitterness in Philip's voice was unmistakable now. Holmes stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the fog-shrouded street. Mr. Ashworth, I'm going to tell you something that may surprise you. I do not believe you murdered your uncle. However, I believe you know who did, and I believe you have been protecting them, not out of loyalty to the murderer, but because their actions served your interests. Philip said nothing, but his face had gone carefully blank. You may go for now, Holmes continued, still facing the window, but I advise you most strongly to consider your position. The truth will emerge regardless of your silence, and your continued obstruction may transform you from a witness into an accessory. After Philip departed, Lestrade exploded. Mr. Holmes, if you believe he knows something... Belief and proof are different creatures, Lestrade. We need the latter, and I believe I know where to find it. Come, gentlemen. We return to Scotland Yard. It is time to unmask our faceless witness. The journey to Scotland Yard was conducted in tense silence. Holmes sat with his eyes closed, his fingers drumming against his knee in that peculiar rhythm that indicated his mind was racing through possibilities at furious speed. As we alighted from the carriage, he suddenly gripped my arm. "Watson, when we enter that interview room, I require you to observe the witness's hands with utmost attention. Note any reaction when I mention certain names. Lestrade, you will position yourself by the door, and no one leaves until I have concluded my examination." The bandaged figure sat exactly as we had left them the previous day, motionless as a statue. Only the eyes visible through the narrow slits tracked our movements as we entered. Holmes took the chair opposite and placed several photographs on the table between them. "I know who you are," Holmes announced without preamble. "The walking stick betrayed you. The indentation on the handle matched to your injured thumb. Marcus Blackwood, son of Lord Blackwood, ruined investor in the Ashworth Railway Company. You may remove the bandages now. This charade has served its purpose." The figure remained motionless for a long moment. Then, with deliberate slowness, gloved hands reached up and began unwinding the linen. Layer after layer fell away, and finally a face emerged, not disfigured, yet not scarred, but perfectly ordinary. It was indeed the man from the photograph, his dark eyes fixed on Holmes with an expression combining defiance and grudging respect. "Very good, Mr. Holmes," Blackwood said in his natural voice, no longer thin and disguised. "I confess I'm impressed. Most men would have remained focused on Julian Carstairs, or at most extended their suspicions to Philip Ashworth, but you saw through the misdirection. Misdirection implies there was something to be distracted from. Yet I find myself wondering if even now we are looking at the true picture. You have claimed to witness Julian Carstairs murdering his father. This testimony was designed to accomplish multiple objectives. Cast suspicion on Julian while simultaneously appearing so bizarre that it invited deeper investigation. You wished us to discover Philip's motive and connection to the other ruined investors. But why?" Blackwood smiled thinly. "Because Philip Ashworth deserves justice, Mr. Holmes. As do I, as do Whitmore and Grenville and a dozen others whose lives Sir Edmund destroyed through his rapacious business practices. The man was a monster who hid behind legal niceties while ruining families and destroying livelihoods. That may be true, but it does not answer my question. Why this elaborate performance? If you wished to murder Sir Edmund Carstairs and escape justice, there were far simpler methods. Instead, you created a mystery so convoluted it virtually demanded the attention of someone like myself. You wanted me involved. Why? Perhaps I wished to ensure the world understood what manner of man Sir Edmund truly was, as your investigations would uncover his crimes, expose his methods. Even if I were eventually caught, the truth would be known." Holmes shook his head slowly. "No, that explanation is too simple, too emotional. You're not a man driven by simple vengeance. Your scheme is too carefully constructed, too multi-layered. There is something else, something I have not yet perceived." He leaned forward intently. "Tell me, Mr. Blackwood, where were you at the moment Sir Edmund was shot?" "I was there, in the study. I entered through the door after Greaves had secured the house for the evening. Sir Edmund was working at his desk. I confronted him about the destruction of the Ashworth Company, about my own losses. He laughed, Mr. Holmes. He actually laughed and told me I should have been more careful with my investments. So I shot him." "With what weapon?" Blackwood hesitated fractionally. "A revolver. I disposed of it in the Thames afterward." "Describe the revolver." "It was a standard service revolver. Black metal, 6 chambers. "You are lying," Holmes stated flatly. "Not about everything. I believe you were indeed in that house that night. But you did not shoot Sir Edmund Carstairs. The police surgeon's report indicates the bullet entered at a downward angle, suggesting the shooter stood above the victim. Yet you claim Sir Edmund was seated at his desk when you shot him, which would require an upward angle. Moreover, the wound pattern suggests a smaller caliber weapon than a service revolver. Blackwood's expression remained impassive, but I noticed his hands had clenched into fists. You are mistaken. I am rarely mistaken about physical evidence. No, Mr. Blackwood, you are protecting someone who was also in that house that night, someone who actually pulled the trigger. Holmes's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Someone you care about enough to sacrifice your freedom through this false confession. The silence that followed was profound. Blackwood's face betrayed nothing, but his eyes shifted momentarily toward the door, a tell so subtle I nearly missed it. Holmes caught it as well. He stood abruptly and turned to Lestrade. Inspector, I require you to bring someone else to Scotland Yard immediately. We need to speak with the one person whose movements that night have never been adequately accounted for, whose potential involvement we have systematically overlooked. Lestrade looked bewildered. Mr. Holmes, everyone in the household has been thoroughly questioned. Who exactly do you wish me to bring in? The housekeeper, Mrs. Martha Dorsey, Holmes replied. And I suggest you bring constables with you. She may prove reluctant to accompany you voluntarily. The housekeeper? Lestrade's incredulity was evident. Mr. Holmes, Mrs. Dorsey is a respectable woman of 60 years who has been in service her entire life. She has no conceivable motive. On the contrary, she has the strongest motive of all, though we have been too blind to see it. Watson, do you recall Mycroft mentioning that Marcus Blackwood was estranged from his family after a scandal involving forged documents? I do, but I fail to see the connection. The scandal involved a marriage, Blackwood's secret marriage to a woman his family deemed unsuitable, a woman of lower social station. His father, Lord Blackwood, I forced an annulment and paid the woman to disappear from Marcus's life. The forged documents were Marcus's attempt to prove the marriage was legally valid. Holmes turned back to Blackwood. That woman was Martha Dorsey, was she not? Before she became a housekeeper, before she buried herself in domestic service to escape her past. Blackwood's composure finally shattered. How could you possibly know that? I did not know with certainty until this moment, when your reaction confirmed it. However, the pieces were there to be assembled. A housekeeper who has served in the Carstairs household for 15 years, arriving shortly after the annulment scandal. A woman whose references, I suspect, would prove difficult to verify if examined closely. Sir Edmund Carstairs was notorious for employing servants whose backgrounds might not withstand scrutiny, as it allowed him to pay lower wages, and, most tellingly, your desperate attempt to confess to a murder you did not commit, protecting someone with such devotion that you would sacrifice everything. She didn't mean to kill him, Blackwood said quietly, all pretense abandoned. You must understand that. It was an accident born of years of accumulated rage. Tell me what truly happened that night. Blackwood closed his eyes. Martha had been planning to leave the Carstairs household. After 15 years of servitude, of swallowing her pride and her anger, she could endure no more. She had learned that Sir Edmund was preparing to terminate several long-serving staff members to reduce expenses, her included. Dismissed without proper compensation after 15 years of loyal service. It was the final cruelty from a man who specialized in cruelty. And she confronted him that night. She went to his study after the household had retired. She intended merely to tell him what she thought of him, to finally speak the truth she had suppressed for so long. I was waiting in the garden. We had arranged to leave London together that very night. I'd finally secured enough money to make a fresh start, somewhere far from England where we might live as we had always wished to live. His voice grew strained, but when she entered the study, Sir Edmund was not alone. Julian Carstairs was there, having just left after another bitter argument with his father. Sir Edmund was in a foul temper, cruel and mocking. When Martha spoke, he laughed at her presumption in thinking she deserved consideration. He said terrible things, Watson, Things about her past, about our marriage, about her unworthiness. And there on his desk was a small pistol he kept for protection. She took it, Holmes stated. She took it, and in a moment of rage accumulated over 15 years, she fired. Sir Edmund fell forward onto his desk. Martha was hysterical. She sent word to me through the scullery door. I came up through the servants' entrance and found her in shock, the pistol still in her hand. The shot had been muffled by the heavy door and thick walls. No one had heard. So you staged the scene, Holmes continued. The forced safe, the opened window, the forged letter suggesting Sir Edmund had been working late. And you placed the body in a position suggesting he had been shot while seated. You took the pistol. What did you do with it? It is in the Thames, as I said. That much was true. And then you conceived this elaborate scheme with the bandages, the false testimony against Julian Carstairs, knowing it would eventually lead to discovery of Philip Ashworth's motive and the wider conspiracy of ruined businessmen. You thought to create reasonable doubt, to make the case so complex that Martha's involvement would never be suspected. Blackwood nodded slowly. I thought if enough people had motives, if the evidence was sufficiently contradictory, perhaps justice might be confused enough to fail. Martha has suffered enough in her life, Mr. Holmes. She deserved better than to hang for killing the man who destroyed her. Yet in your efforts to protect her, you have ensured her exposure, Holmes said, not unkindly. The truth has a way of emerging regardless of how many layers of deception we wrap around it. The door opened, and Lestrade entered with 2 constables and a slight, grey-haired woman whose dignity remained intact despite the obvious distress in her eyes. Martha Dorsey looked at Marcus Blackwood and shook her head sadly. You should have let me confess from the beginning, Marcus. I told you I would not let you sacrifice yourself for my actions. Martha Dorsey settled into the chair beside Blackwood with the quiet dignity of someone who had long ago accepted whatever fate might bring. Her hands, I noted. They were steady despite the gravity of her situation, the hands of someone who had finally laid down a burden carried too long. I will make a full confession, Mr. Holmes, she said in a voice that carried no tremor. Marcus has told you the essential truth, though he has been too generous in his description of my actions. It was not an accident born of rage. I went to that study with murder in my heart, though I lacked the courage to admit it even to myself. Holmes regarded her with an expression I had rarely seen, something approaching sympathy. How long had you been planning it, Mrs. Dorsey? Planning is perhaps too strong a word. I'd been imagining it, dreaming of it for years. Every slight, every cruelty, every casual destruction of someone's life that I witnessed in that house added fuel to a fire I kept carefully banked. Now, when Sir Edmund informed me that I was to be dismissed without the pension I had been promised, something inside me simply broke. The pistol was his own. Yes, he kept it in the top drawer of his desk. I'd seen it many times while cleaning. That night when he laughed at me, when he told me I should be grateful he had allowed a soiled woman like myself to work in a respectable household. I opened the drawer and took it. He was still laughing when I shot him. Lestrade shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Dorsey, you understand that you are confessing to murder? I understand perfectly, Inspector. I'm guilty of murder, and I'm prepared to face the consequences. My only regret is that Marcus became entangled in my crime. He should have left me to confess immediately, but love makes fools of us all. Blackwood reached for her hand, but the constables moved to prevent it. Holmes held up a hand to stop them. Allow them this moment, Inspector. We are not barbarians. He turned back to Martha. Tell me, did anyone else in the household suspect what had occurred? No one. The servants were all asleep. Greaves is quite deaf and sleeps at the back of the house. I had ensured the wine at dinner was particularly generous, which made everyone sleep more soundly. When Marcus arrived, we worked quickly. He was the one who thought of staging it as a burglary. He forced the safe. He has some facility with locks acquired during his wilder youth. We opened the window to suggest entry from outside. And the forged letter? That was Marcus's idea as well. He thought if the letter appeared to be written by a left-handed person, it might cast suspicion on Julian or Philip, both of whom are left-handed. But Marcus himself is right-handed, so the forgery was imperfect. We did not realize the paper lacked the proper watermark until it was too late to replace it. Holmes nodded slowly. And then came the masterstroke, Marcus's appearance as the bandaged witness. A performance designed to both accuse and create doubt, to lead investigation toward the other victims of Sir Edmund's business practices. It was, I must admit, remarkably clever. Had you not made those small errors, the angle of the bullet wound, the watermark, the walking stick, you might well have succeeded in creating sufficient confusion to escape justice entirely. I did not wish to escape justice, Martha said firmly. I wished only to ensure that Marcus escaped it, that he committed no crime beyond loving an unsuitable woman and trying to protect her from the consequences of her own actions. He is guilty of being an accessory after the fact, of staging false evidence, of perjury, and of obstructing a police investigation, Lestrade pointed out. These are serious charges, Mrs. Dorsey. But they are not murder, Holmes interjected quietly. There are circumstances here that any reasonable judge must consider. Sir Edmund Carstairs was not an innocent victim. His systematic destruction of business rivals, his casual cruelty toward those in his employ, his mockery of a woman whose life he had helped to ruin. These do not justify murder, but they provide context that must be acknowledged. He turned to Lestrade. Inspector, Mrs. Dorsey must be charged with murder. The law allows no alternative. However, I believe the circumstances warrant a recommendation of clemency. She was provoked beyond what any reasonable person might endure, and her crime, while serious, was not premeditated in the legal sense. She went to that study to speak her mind, not to kill. The courts will decide that, Mr. Holmes, Lestrade replied, though his tone had softened. Mrs. Dorsey, Martha Dorsey, I'm arresting you for the murder of Sir Edmund Carstairs. Mr. Blackwood, you're also under arrest as an accessory to murder and for obstruction of justice. Constables, if you please. As the constables led them away, Martha Dorsey paused at the door and looked back at Holmes. Thank you, Mr. Holmes, for understanding and for allowing me to tell the truth at last. Secrets are terrible burdens, and I am grateful to lay mine down, whatever the cost. The fog had finally lifted by the time Holmes and I returned to Baker Street that evening, revealing a sky scattered with stars that seemed improbably bright after days of grey obscurity. Holmes had been silent throughout the journey, smoking his pipe with an intensity that suggested his mind was still working through the complexities of the case. Mrs. Hudson had left a cold supper for us, which we consumed in continued silence. Only when Holmes had settled into his chair with a glass of brandy did he finally speak. You are troubled, Watson. I can see it in the way you have been avoiding my gaze all evening. You believe I should have seen the truth sooner, that my pursuit of elaborate conspiracies blinded me to the simpler reality. Not at all, Holmes, I protested. The case was extraordinarily complex. As Blackwood's misdirection was masterful. Anyone might have been deceived. Anyone except myself, you mean to say. I should have recognized earlier that the very complexity of the scheme was itself suspicious. When a crime appears to involve multiple conspirators and Byzantine plotting, one must consider the possibility that this complexity is itself a form of camouflage, designed to conceal a simpler truth beneath layers of deliberate confusion. He swirled the brandy in his glass, watching the amber liquid catch the lamplight. Martha Dorsey murdered Sir Edmund Carstairs in a moment of rage that had been building for 15 years. That is the essential truth. Everything else, the staged burglary, the mysterious witness, the web of ruined businessmen, was Marcus Blackwood's desperate attempt to protect the woman he loved, as he created a puzzle so intricate that he hoped the truth would be lost within it. Yet you unraveled it nonetheless, only after wasting valuable time chasing shadows. The physical evidence was clear from the beginning. The angle of the bullet wound, the forged letter, the inconsistencies in the staging. But I allowed myself to be distracted by the theatrical elements, the bandaged witness, the conspiracy of victims. I wanted the case to be complex because complex cases engage my faculties more fully than simple domestic murders. I considered this admission so characteristic of Holmes's ruthless self-assessment. What will happen to them, to Martha and Marcus? That depends on many factors beyond our control. The prosecution will argue for murder with malice aforethought. The defense will present evidence of Sir Edmund's systematic cruelty, the provocation Martha endured, her previously unblemished character. A sympathetic jury might reduce the charge to manslaughter, which would mean imprisonment rather than the gallows. And Blackwood? His actions, while legally criminal, were motivated by love rather than malice. A good barrister might secure a relatively lenient sentence, perhaps 5 years. He will survive it, though it will age him considerably. Holmes paused. There is also the matter of public opinion. When the newspapers report the full circumstances of Sir Edmund's death, including his business practices and personal cruelties, there may be considerable sympathy for both defendants. The court of public opinion often influences the courts of law, though we pretend otherwise. A knock at our door interrupted his musings. Mrs. Hudson appeared with a telegram, which Holmes opened and read with raised eyebrows. From Mycroft. It seems Julian Carstairs has approached him privately, offering to provide character testimony on behalf of Martha Dorsey. Apparently, the son is less callous than his father and recognizes that justice sometimes wears an unexpected face. That is remarkably decent of him. It is also remarkably self-serving. With his father dead, Julian inherits everything. He can afford to be magnanimous, and public sympathy costs him nothing while potentially improving his reputation. Holmes set down the telegram. Though I confess I may be too cynical. Perhaps there is genuine decency in the gesture, regardless of secondary benefits. He rose and walked to the window, gazing out at the now clear night. This case has reminded me of something I sometimes forget in my pursuit of intellectual puzzles, Watson. Behind every crime lies human suffering, not just the victims, but often the perpetrators as well. Martha Dorsey suffered for 15 years under the tyranny of a cruel master. Marcus Blackwood suffered the loss of the woman he loved, forced apart by social conventions that value birth over character. Even Julian Carstairs, dissolute though he may be, suffered under the weight of his father's disappointment and contempt. You sound almost philosophical, Holmes. Perhaps I am growing old and sentimental. Or perhaps this particular case, with its layers of deception concealing a simple human tragedy, has reminded me that logic and deduction, powerful as they are, must sometimes acknowledge the role of emotion and circumstance in human affairs. He turned back to me with a slight smile. Do not worry, Watson. I shall be my usual insufferable self by morning. But tonight I find myself hoping that Martha Dorsey and Marcus Blackwood receive mercy rather than mere justice. They deserve it, I said quietly. Deserve is a dangerous word in matters of law. But yes, Watson, in this instance I'm inclined to agree with you. They deserve it. The trial of Martha Dorsey and Marcus Blackwood commenced 6 weeks later at the Old Bailey, and it proved to be one of the most sensational proceedings London had witnessed in years. The courtroom was packed daily with spectators, journalists, and members of society eager to witness the downfall of those connected to the notorious Sir Edmund Carstairs. Holmes and I attended the opening arguments and the final summations, though Holmes found the intervening testimony tedious and preferred to follow the case through newspaper reports. The prosecution presented a straightforward case. Premeditated murder committed by a disgruntled servant, followed by an elaborate conspiracy to obstruct justice. They painted Martha Dorsey as a calculating killer who had nursed her grievances for years before acting upon them. Marcus Blackwood, they argued, was not a romantic figure protecting his beloved, but a co-conspirator who had actively worked to pervert the course of justice. The defence, however, told a different story. Led by the formidable Sir Michael Ashford, they methodically exposed Sir Edmund's character through testimony from former employees, bankrupted business rivals, and even members of his own social circle. The picture that emerged was of a man whose cruelty was not merely incidental to his business success, but integral to his character. Servants testified to verbal abuse and unpaid wages. Business associates described ruthless tactics that, while technically legal, violated every principle of fair dealing. The revelation of Martha's past, her brief marriage to Marcus Blackwood, the forced annulment, her descent into servitude, was handled with such delicacy that even the most hardened observers found themselves sympathizing with her plight. When she took the stand and described, in her quiet, dignified manner, the final confrontation with Sir Edmund, there was hardly a dry eye in the courtroom. "He told me I should be grateful," she testified, her voice never wavering. Grateful that a man of his standing had allowed someone like me, a woman whose reputation had been destroyed through no fault of her own, to work in his household. He said I was fortunate he had not exposed my past to the other servants, that he could have turned me out into the streets at any time. And when I finally found the courage to tell him what I truly thought of him, he laughed. That laughter was the last sound he made. Marcus Blackwood's testimony was equally compelling. He spoke of his love for Martha, of the injustice of their forced separation, and of his determination to protect her, even at the cost of his own freedom. His description of the elaborate scheme he had constructed, the bandaged witness, the false testimony, the misdirection, was delivered with such obvious remorse that even the prosecution seemed moved. "I'm guilty of many things," he stated clearly. "I'm guilty of deceiving the police, of creating false evidence, of attempting to obstruct justice. But I am not sorry for trying to protect the woman I love. If loving her is a crime, then I am guilty of that as well, and I would commit it again without hesitation." Holmes, who had been called as an expert witness, provided testimony that was characteristically precise and, I thought, strategically calibrated to assist the defense without appearing to do so. He described the physical evidence, the inconsistencies that had led him to unravel the deception, and, most significantly, his professional opinion that the crime showed no signs of premeditation. The staging of the scene occurred after Sir Edmund's death, not before, he testified. This suggests that Mrs. Dorsey did not enter that study with murder planned. Had she done so, she would have prepared her escape in advance. Instead, she acted in a moment of overwhelming emotion, and it was only Mr. Blackwood's subsequent intervention that created the appearance of calculation. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned, the foreman announced verdicts that split the difference between mercy and justice. Martha Dorsey was found guilty not of murder, but of manslaughter, with a strong recommendation for clemency given the extraordinary provocation she had endured. Marcus Blackwood was found guilty of obstruction of justice and being an accessory after the fact. The judge, a stern man named Lord Justice Pemberton, delivered sentences that reflected both the letter of the law and an acknowledgement of the unusual circumstances. Now, Martha Dorsey received 7 years' imprisonment. Marcus Blackwood received 4 years. Both sentences were considerably lighter than they might have been, and there was speculation that the judge had been influenced by the enormous public sympathy the defendants had attracted. As we left the Old Bailey that afternoon, Holmes was uncharacteristically quiet. Finally, as our hansom carried us back toward Baker Street through the bustling London streets, he spoke. "Justice has been served after a fashion. The law has been satisfied, society has been protected, and yet I cannot help but feel that something essential has been lost in the proceedings. Martha Dorsey will emerge from prison an old woman, her best years consumed by punishment for a crime that was, in many ways, so the inevitable consequence of years of accumulated injustice. But she will emerge, I pointed out. She will not hang, and Marcus will wait for her. That is something, Holmes." "Yes, Watson, that is something. Perhaps it is enough."